Erev Tov, everybody. Thanks for the schedule adjustment. It's Tuesday night, and we are underway with Parashat Korach and continuing with Rabbi Josh Fagelson and his big questions and approaches to themes in the Parashah more than close textual readings of the Parashah. And I think the one for Parshat Korach certainly resonates as very relevant to us today. And he chooses both a Hasidic text and more classical Jewish texts to unpack the ideas. We see less secular, for lack of a better term, texts in this essay. And I think the issue feels more naturally accessible than some of the ones we've seen in other weeks. So I'll share my screen. We'll begin. Korach, how do we disagree? He writes, there may be no question more pressing for us as a society than this one. How do we disagree? From state legislatures to Twitter, from college campuses to family dinner tables, we seem to be suffering from our inability to sit with discomfort and difference. It appears we have developed a dangerous cultural habit of trying to eliminate ideas, attitudes, and people who trigger emotional distress. I'm not even sure if the term cancel culture had yet become popular just in the couple years since the publishing of this book. I hasten to add that I'm not making a judgment on whether that distress is real or justified, right? Our cultural habit of trying to eliminate the things that produce distress. He's not judging whether that distress is real or justified, meaning how serious is all the I'm triggered, I don't feel safe, I don't feel, comfortable with the things you're saying. If one of my children says they're hurting, I accept that they're hurting until they say they aren't. I don't judge for them the extent of their pain. I trust they'll figure that out and articulate it on their own. And I extend the same courtesy to people who aren't my children, which is to say the rest of the world. Other people will take a different approach. Not that long ago, I was at an event at Riverside Church, and the pastor of Riverside Church was showing a film about the role of Jews in the and blacks in the desegregation of an amusement park in Maryland, DC area. And the pastor of the church said, one of the problems, we're always stepping on each other's toes these days. One of the problems is that our toes are too sensitive. And what Rabbi Josh Fagelson is saying here is, I'm not judging whether our toes are too sensitive. I accept that we feel our toes are being stepped on. Part one. As important, I understand my role and responsibility as a parent to help my children develop the capacity to manage their suffering. Okay, so how to live with the stepped on toes. Of course, to avoid unnecessary pain, but also to accept that living means bearing the slings and arrows of existence, which are simply a part of life. So we may not be able to reasonably expect that our toes aren't going to get stepped on. We can accept that we will feel hurt, but how do we bear that and live with it? In every moment, we are dying and being reborn, experiencing both pleasant and unpleasant sensations. My own Jewish mindfulness practice is an exercise in being aware of and responding mindfully to my own calling as an Eved Hashem, a servant of the divine in the moment, and not following mindlessly after the longings of my eyes and heart in the concluding words of last week's Parashah. I aim to live this way not only for myself, but as an example for my children, and by extension, for my students and the rest of the world. Okay, so we want to accept that there will be hurt, pains, insults, judgments of us, things said that will make us feel uncomfortable. The discomfort or the pain is real, but we want to learn how to live with it. Yet it is one thing to do that internally, responding to my own inner voice. It is another to do it in response to the voices and words and actions of other people. Not an unrelated thing, but still a different kind of endeavor. When the stimuli involve other people, the response, in my experience, becomes more complex, right? We can manage our own internal pushes and pulls, but how do we learn to manage the pain that we feel is inflicted on us by others, by their judgments, statements, stances, etc. How do I sit with the discomfort someone else may be causing me because of their opinions or views? Likewise, how do I sit with the discomfort that someone else experiences because of my words, actions, or beliefs? How do I avoid being triggered and instead respond wisely? And not only within myself, how do I, as a family member, a neighbor, a citizen, a leader, hold a civic space in which others can do the same, a space of dialogue and productive disagreement? Korach, unheavenly disputes. These questions come to mind in reading Parshat Korach, in which the rabbinic imagination, which in the rabbinic imagination becomes the paradigmatic example of unhealthy disagreement. Okay, so our Parashah, whose subject is the various rebellions of Korach and his 250 followers, and Datan and Aviram, and whoever else, On, and whoever else were involved in these various rebellions against Moshe, against Aharon, against the Levim, um, or the Kohanim, really. These are the various rebellions, arguments that are generated in our parasha, and they are understood by the rabbis to be unhealthy disagreement. Quoting from Pirkei Avot, chapter 5, Mishnah 17. Kol machloket shehi l'shem shamayim sofa lihitkayem. Every argument that is for the sake of heaven is destined to prove constructive. But if it is not for the sake of heaven, it is destined not to prove constructive. What's an example of an argument for the sake of heaven? The argument of Hillel and Shammai. What's an example of an argument not for the sake of heaven? The argument of Korach and all his followers. Commenting on this passage, the 15th century Italian commentator Rabbi Ovadia of Bartanura writes, I don't think I had seen this comment, and I loved it. Regarding the controversy which is for the sake of heaven, the purpose and aim is to arrive at the truth. Right? A machloket l'shem shamayim, he's defining as the goal being to arrive at the truth. And this process proves constructive. As it is said, from a disagreement, the truth will be revealed. Right? So when people are arguing and their goal is to find truth, actually their argument somehow helps generate more truth. This was revealed in the disputes between Hillel and Shammai, as in the end it was determined that the law was like the school of Hillel, meaning through their argumentation, somehow the bottom line, of course, this is a very kind of, I don't know what the right word, maybe reductive understanding of truth. Truth is how the law comes out, and through the arguments, the law gets determined. And so because of their arguments to try to find the truth emerges, and that is the school of Hillel in most of the arguments. And regarding a controversy which is not for the sake of heaven, its purpose is to achieve power and for the love of victory, and its end will be destructive, right? The goal of the arguers in an argument which is not for the sake of heaven is not to get to the truth. It's just to win and to be stronger than the other person. And that is ultimately destructive. This is as we find in the dispute of Korach and his band, as their aim and end goal was a lust for honor and power, just the opposite. They weren't trying to actually understand who should be the leader, what is God's will. They just wanted to be in charge. They wanted the honor and they wanted the power, and that did not end well. That is true. Okay, back to Rabbi Josh Feigelson. That is straightforward enough. Yet it still leaves us asking, what are the actual habits and practices of mind, body, and soul that you or I or we might cultivate that would enable us to sit with the internal discomfort and distress that arise when we're in a disagreement, much less a public one like those of Hillel and Shammai or Korach and Moshe, right? He's asking, how do you even stay in the argument? Maybe the deeper question is, and to have a fighting chance of getting to truth, you have to be able to kind of maintain your sense of self and stay in the engagement of the back and forth. You can't get to the truth if you're not at least able to stay in it. To answer this, we'll look to a teaching from Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, which emphasizes the central role of awareness, da'at, in cultivating productive disagreement and peace on the intrapersonal, interpersonal, and communal levels. Again, his translation of da'at as awareness shows his sort of spiritual meditative bias. I'm not sure exactly how I would translate da'at, but this is definitely, Institute for Jewish Spirituality speak as a translation of da'at as awareness. So the passage is from Likutei Moharan, the teachings of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, and we'll look at his translation. Peace is dependent upon awareness, da'at, while dispute is the opposite of awareness. So for starters, we start out with these, nothing good to say about argument. Argument kind of removes us from consciousness. It puts us into a fight mode in which we don't have real, conscious awareness of what we're doing. And therefore it's the opposite of peace. And it can't go anywhere good. Nevertheless, there is dispute that is for the sake of heaven, which in truth is expansive awareness, even greater than the awareness that is the foundation of peace. Okay, so we get something fascinating here. First of all, whereas the Mishnah and Pirkei Avot just sort of set it up as two kinds of arguments for the sake of heaven and arguments that are not, it almost feels like he's saying most disputes are not, and therefore most disputes are the opposite of awareness and, can lead to no peace. But there is a kind, not 50-50, but some rare subset of arguments, which is arguments that are for the sake of heaven. That is expansive awareness. And actually, that is even greater than the foundation of peace. It kind of makes me think about the idea that, where Ba'alei Tshuva stand, even Tzaddikim can't stand, that somehow going through argumentation for the right purpose produces even more awareness than just being at a place of non-conflict, if that's what peace is to begin with. For in fact, such dispute for the sake of heaven, expresses great love and peace. As our sages of blessed memory said in Kiddushin 30b, et vahev besufa, passage from next week's Parashah Chukat, those in dispute for the sake of heaven, do not move from there. This is how the Gemara interprets this little phrase from Parshat Chukat, where they are engaged in dispute, until they become ohavim, lovers. And do not read the next word as bisufa, the place called Sufa, but bisofa at its conclusion. So et vahev bisufa, which is a place name in the book of Numbers, vahev in the Sufa, becomes ohev bisofa. They love in the end. When people are engaged in dispute for the sake of heaven, they stay at it. And in the end, while they had been interlocutors and arguers, they wind up being lovers at the end. This is the meaning of what our sages of blessed memory said. Our quote from Pirkei Avot before, a machloket which is l'shem shamayim, sofa lihit kayem. In the end, it will prove constructive, right? And here he's picked up on a little rabbinic literature, intertextual kind of connection between rabbinic literature, which is that the rabbis read the verse of bisufa as sofa, and the rabbis in Pirkei Avot about the argument for the sake of heaven say sofa lihit kayem. So we have this connection with the sofas, as it is truly an expression of love, as we said. This dispute will prove constructive, as it is grounded in the dimension of love, as it is written et vahev bisufa, as explained above. And this, machloket l'shem shamayim, argument for the sake of heaven, corresponds to Moshe. Or this is a very, I'm curious to see the language he uses. Yes, Bechina. Rabbi Nachman, and what little I know about Rabbi Nachman is the tiny bit I was able to glean from a wonderful teacher who taught at Chovevei many years ago, Dr. B.T. Roi, lived in Riverdale for a little while years back, great scholar of Chassidut. And she tried to explain to us what Rabbi Nachman meant when he had these notions of Bechina. It means a aspect or a quality, and he sort of sets up arrays of connections. Often it's kind of two sides of an issue, and one side has this lineup of associations which share a certain set of qualities, and the opposite on the other side. So the machloket l'shem shamayim is bechinat Moshe. This corresponds to, or it shares some qualitative aspect with Moshe, because Moshe is the aspect of awareness. Again, we see it here. Moshe is bechinat da'at, which is bechinat machloket l'shem shamayim. The Hebrew ze bechinat Moshe, ki Moshe hu bechinat hadat, shehu bechinat machloket l'shem shamayim. Right. So this corresponds to Moshe. This idea of being lovers in the end corresponds to Moshe, because Moshe is awareness, and awareness is develops this aspect of or shares some quality with machloket l'shem shamayim. Thus, Moshe is an acrostic for Machloket Shammai Hillel. Here you get a nice little nugget. Mem Shin He Machloket Shammai Hillel, which is what the sages in Pirkei Avot said was the paradigm of Machloket L'Shem Shamayim, the opposite of the argument between Korach and, you know, the various parties he was arguing against, which of course does include Moshe, which makes this interesting. Moshe is the model of Machloket L'Shem Shamayim, and yet he is the subject of the attack by Korach, which is a Machloket Shelo L'Shem Shamayim. So Moshe is an acrostic for Machloket Shammai Hillel, the ongoing disagreement between Shammai and Hillel, for they embodied or enacted the form of dispute for the sake of heaven. The redemption from Egypt, going to the next level of associations here. The redemption from Egypt therefore came through Moshe, because the essence of redemption is through awareness, as it is written, and you will be aware of Hashem who took you out of Egypt. Vidatem, let's get that pasuk. Vidatem ki Hashem hotziatchem, and then the pasuk about Sukkot. You should live in booths for 7 days. All citizens of Israel shall live in booths. Leman yedu dorotechem, not just so that the future generations will know, but as he translates it, in order that future generations may live with the awareness that I made the Israelite people live in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt, I, the Lord your God. So the redemption is something which is tied to knowledge, understanding, or awareness. The essence of redemption is through awareness. That's a leap, because these texts are talking about after the redemption, you should have knowledge, awareness of it. The redemption produces awareness, but he's taking a step back and kind of linking it earlier, that the essence of redemption comes through awareness. And therefore it came through Moshe, because Moshe is this aspect of awareness, if you're following the chain of associations.
Even is it possibly saying the purpose of the redemption is the awareness?
Let's see. Let's look at the Hebrew. Al Kain, Hayagulat Mitzrayim al Yedei Moshe. Redemption came from Moshe. Ki ikar hageula al Yedei hadat. There it seems like redemption comes through awareness. In the English, it's a little bit more ambiguous, but in the Hebrew here, it seems to me less ambiguous. Ikar hagula al yedei hadat, not, bishvil hadat or something like that. It does seem like it's through awareness. Again, so it just means I think he's making a little bit more of a leap in order to make this argument. Now, it is written in the Holy Zohar, matzah is a remedy. For matzah participates in the nexus of dispute for the sake of heaven / awareness / peace. He says it up here. Matzah shehi bechinat machloket l'shem shamayim, bechinat da'at, bechinat shalom, right, and also bechinat Moshe. Matzah, which is, he translated it nicely, participates in the nexus of dispute for the sake of heaven, awareness, and peace. These three things are all associated attributes, and is a cure. This is because peace is a cure, as it is written, Shalom, Shalom, la rachok v'la karov, amar Hashem urefativ, I think. Peace, peace to the far and the near, says God, and I will heal them. Okay, so we have an association in that pasuk between Shalom and Rifuah, healing. So peace is a cure. Matzah, that's, the Zohar says that matzah is a cure, and that's because matzah is also bound up in this nexus that includes peace, and peace is a cure. For in the main, illness, heaven forbid, stems from an absence of peace, i.e. dispute among the four foundational humors or elements, when one of the elements overpowers another, but peace is a cure, right? So illness itself seems to come from almost, not almost, right? The science here is the science of the four humors. And if those four things are out of balance, then you have illness. So that imbalance is sort of a state of a lack of peace. Um, and peace is then the cure for that illness. But matzah is called poor person's bread. It represents dispute for the sake of heaven, yet poverty can be considered the lack of awareness. Okay, so now we have a conflict. Up until now, we've been able to sort of line things up, matching each other. But now we have a problem with matzah. Matzah is supposed to be healing and peace and awareness, but matzah is also called lechem oni. And it's also supposed to be dispute for the sake of heaven. But matzah is also called lechem oni, poor person's bread. And poverty, according to the Gemara and Nadarim, is also considered a lack of awareness. This is the Gemara and Nadarim that I think talks about the various things that is it? I don't remember exactly what the context of that Gemara is, but we'll take him at his word that poverty is considered a lack of awareness. This is then reflected in a sick person, as it is written, "Why are you so poor of spirit, O prince?" But matzah, which represents dispute for the sake of heaven, is a remedy for impoverished awareness, as explained above. This is the meaning of poor person's bread. It is a cure for poverty of awareness, as explained above, right? So it's the bread of a poor person because it's the bread that you give to a poor person to heal their illness. It's not that it's a bread that's representative of the poor person, but it's a bread that you give to the poor person to cure their poverty, which is poverty of awareness. Again, that's not a literal reading of matzah. The quality of matzah, as we know, is that it does contain opposites and contradictions. It is the bread of affliction and the bread of redemption. So because that's tricky for the associations of Rabbi Nachman, he has to say that when we say it's the bread of affliction or the poor person's bread, we mean it's bread we would give to the poor person to try to heal them of their impoverished awareness. Okay, so if you haven't learned Rabbi Nachman, we've got a little taste of his what Rabbi Finkelstein will describe again in a moment. Now he's going to go through and unpack it for us, but while it's not Parsha directly, it's a great thing to get a chance to dip our toes into together. Within this rich web of interrelated concepts, Rabbi Nachman weaves together the notions of awareness, dispute, and peace through the symbols of Moshe and Matzah, and through the centrality of these latter two to the exodus from Egypt. Perhaps most important for us, he draws our attention to the connection between da'at, or mindful awareness, and machloket l'shem shamayim, dispute for the sake of heaven. Whereas machloket, or dispute that is not for the sake of heaven, is grounded in a lack of awareness, machloket that comes from a place of mindful awareness is both ultimately destined to prove constructive, as per the Mishnah, and is the basis of shalom, wholeness, and peace. In the concluding paragraphs, Rabbi Nachman suggests this is true not only interpersonally, but intrapersonally as well. When we are not whole with ourselves, when we do not practice mindful awareness, that is, cultivate our capacity of da'at within our lived experience, then we become party to, as it were, a machloket, a dispute with our own nature, between the elements within us. That can lead to spiritual illness and perhaps other forms of illness too. By contrast, when we cultivate our capacity for da'at, we help ourselves to better manage the impulses, drives, urges, and thoughts that make up our inner life, leading to greater peace within our own heart minds, and in turn, within the larger collectivities of which we are part. Please bear with me. I just got to pause for a moment. Okay, almost there. Practice for transformation in the age of information. This lesson about the vital link between inner spiritual work and communal peacemaking is one we would do well to lift up much more in our communal and societal discourse today. The advent of social media in particular has given a bullhorn and a forum to those who shout rather than listen, who react rather than respond, who seek to divide and label people rather than embrace and dignify people. In turn, those who are not party to the debate often seem to feel pressure to pick a side, rather than sustain a more deliberative and contemplative way of engaging with fellow images of the divine. Facebook, to say nothing of Twitter, is not generally a space for machloket l'shem shamayim. Yet even, or perhaps precisely in these spaces, we would do well to take Rabbi Nachman to heart. What might it look like if we brought our practice to bear on our civic lives, as they play out in social media or other spheres? For me, Jewish mindfulness practice has helped me not to be triggered by words and images I might initially find shocking or inflammatory. By cultivating my capacity for da'at, I find I've developed a spiritual muscle that allows me to first notice the sensations arising in my body, in my gut, in my heart, and to gently inquire of myself, what is it I'm feeling right now? Where is that feeling coming from? In doing so, I sometimes notice that I'm sensing a kind of internalized pressure to pick a side, to proclaim my solidarity. I give myself the time and space to listen to my own body and heart mind, and to discern whether the impulse I'm feeling is coming from a place of truth, right? Circling all the way back to what Rav Ovadia Bartanura said about machloket l'shem shamayim. It's a kind of argument which is about seeking truth, the divine voice within, or perhaps from somewhere else. Having brought my awareness to these sensations and these deeper questions, I next turn to questions about what action I might take. If I respond, why am I doing so? What's motivating me? Will my response generate more heat or more light? Is it grounded in compassion or in something else? Will it make the Shekhinah, the divine presence, more recognizable? What might be other implications of my responding right now? If this really is so important, what might be other ways I might engage that could help others develop their own awareness and contribute to greater shlemut, wholeness, in themselves and the world? Again, my awareness, right, dot, in this practice is not limited to cognitive or intellectual faculties. More often than not, I find my own body aids in my awareness about how my answers are or aren't in alignment with my deeper sense of the divine call. If I land on a proposed course of action and my gut is still saying to me this isn't quite right, I listen to that because it's most often another way I experience the Holy One calling to me. When at last my body is at peace with an idea for speech or action, I find I'm able to express myself in ways that bring greater peace to the conversation. I don't claim to have any particular wisdom, of course, far from it. This is not some radically new concept. Indeed, it is radically old as Shammai and Hillel. But in a culture that values the new, the immediate, the loud, and the snarky, that thrives on dividing and disconnecting us from ourselves and one another, a culture, in short, of machloket lo l'shem shamayim, right, disputes not for the sake of heaven, we are called to respond with da'at, with expansive, mindful awareness, in order to nurture shalom in ourselves and in the world. Just read the questions and then open it up. He says, Rabbi Nachman invokes the following Talmudic teaching. Those in dispute for the sake of heaven do not move from where they are engaged in dispute until they become lovers. In your own words, what do you think this teaching means? How do you understand the process of remaining in dispute leading to love? What kind of love is being referred to here? Do you have any experience in your own life with this kind of disagreement? If so, what about you, your interlocutor, and the moment contributed to the outcome? How does this help you to understand Rabbi Nachman's teaching? 2, in your own experience, does cultivating your capacity for da'at, mindful awareness, contribute to your ability to sit with the discomfort of disagreement? If so, what is it about this practice that helps you? If not, why? 3, Are there areas of your life in which you might want to bring more mindfulness practice to your approach to disagreements? Work, family, social media, religious or community association, something else? How might you do that? How might you employ your mindfulness practice to support you in bringing more mindfulness to these situations? So again, we don't do close textual readings in the Midbar with Rabbi Josh Fagelson, but we extract a theme from the Parsha, take a Hasidic text and unpack it. He doesn't even circle back to sort of say how might Korach and Moshe's dispute have looked differently if either of them had engaged in Da'at. I think it's a fair, Korach is certainly stylized as a character who does not have Da'at. But I wonder, and um, at the risk of victim blaming, to borrow a modern term, I don't put the burden on Moshe, but one wonders kind of, was there any way Moshe could have reacted differently to make this go differently? Or, was it an impossible thing to turn into a machloket l'shem shamayim just because Korach, you know, wasn't an interlocutor that could have um, made that possible. But open for reactions to the Rabbi Nachman teaching, to the Parsha, to the overarching questions, or to our own, the way he framed it as around social media and where we have debates today. We got a great group, so happy to open it up and hear thoughts or reactions. Kicking it off with Lance.
What kind of dispute is the oven of Aknai?
One of your favorite texts.
Yeah.
It seems like a dispute for the sake of heaven.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it's a dispute really between Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus and Rabbi Gamliel. It's a dispute between someone who sees God, da'at, perceives God. I would translate that as perception, and someone who doesn't want to see God, really doesn't care about God at all. And it seems to me in the example of Shammai and Hillel, does it really matter which way the candles go? I mean, does it really make a difference to anybody? It's a dispute, and I guess they want the truth of some kind, which is what the oven of Akna is about. But I just think that Hillel and Shammai is a very poor example. My sense here is that the rabbis want power, and there is no difference between Korach and the rabbis through my lens. The main point here is, the one question I have really is, what disputes are resolved by God and what disputes are resolved by man?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a very
Korach is resolved by God. The oven of Aknai, through my lens, is resolved by God. But Hillel and Shammai are not.
Right. Right. Yes.
I think in the age of Trump, there are certainly irreconcilable disputes.
Right.
Long-term friendships have gone south. And people you love, you just can't sit with anymore. At least I find that to be the case.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And to pile on Mark's comment, I wonder if Josh was writing this today after October 7th, if what he would say.
Yeah.
But to defend Hillel and Shammai, because I checked with Rabbi Google on this, asking what are the prototypical disputes between Hillel and Shammai. They have Hanukkah candles, as you mentioned. They also have admission to Torah study, where Shammai thought there should be higher standards than Hillel. Divorce, Shammai allowed divorce only for serious transgressions. Hillel allows it for minor reasons. And this was the one I didn't know at all. Shammai showed more consideration for women's legal independence, accepting women's testimony on a broader range of cases than Hillel.
Fascinating. Fascinating. And Give me a minute to dredge this up. Rav Eli Ofran, in his book that came out last year on themes of Elul and Tshuva, he attempts to actually develop a thematic analysis of Hillel and Shammai, in which Shammai is sort of rearwards looking and Hillel is forwards looking, and kind of try to stretch it across a number of different machlokot. And obviously, the piece in which Rav Ovadia Bartanura says that, going all the way back up, says that their arguments are arguments whose purpose is to arrive at the truth, and it proves constructive because it was determined that the halacha is like Hillel. That part doesn't resonate with me as much. To me, it feels like it proves constructive because they sharpen each other's opinions, and two compelling positions, held alongside each other, help us get closer to the truth. And to that extent, I like the sort of counterpoint that says that, we paskin like Hillel in these days, but in the days of Mashiach, we will paskin like Shammai. That already kind of keeps the pluralism, which I think is often a vehicle for getting closer to truth. There are different definitions of truth that may be at play here. But yeah, I appreciate all of that. And going back also to what Lance said, I think the question of who resolves the disputes is interesting for classifying and categorizing them, but to me feels secondary to kind of whether we view them as for the sake of heaven or not. I think, shouldn't be contingent on whether, how the disputes get resolved ultimately. James asked if there was a story about Hillel and Shammai killing each other.
About Beit Hillel.
They like
Shammai killing,
having
or
arguments where they,
harming each other at least.
I prefer to like from the right.
yeah, I don't know.
Each other down the stairs. Anyway,
I don't know.
I was always loved this parsha because
Yes.
it's the paradigmatic blood feud. Years ago, during the Vietnam War, a bunch of us kids were asked by the rabbi to give drushos on each Shabbos for about 6 weeks while he went away, and I was assigned Korach. So I likened Nixon, Agnew, and Mitchell to Korach. The forces of good being Moshe, and those who were against the Vietnam War.
I love it.
Well, you have no idea what flack I got from the right-wing members of Congregation Beth Shalom in Lawrence. They demanded my presence on Saturday afternoon for Mincha to excoriate me about how I could possibly say the things that I said. So I never think of Korach. I think of the Vietnam War.
Wow. Awesome associations. That's great. That's great. I see Bracha. Go for it.
Yeah, I'm thinking of three things. One thing I'm thinking of is in relation to this focus on awareness. And, I'm thinking, when is there a combative kind of situation where there's also connectedness? And if you look at any sport where two people are playing opposite each other, it seems like they can only feel good about the game if they're each paying attention, not just to where they are, but where the other person is also, in terms of building a rhythm and stuff like that. And then it's not just two individual people, it's a team. It's something that has flow to it. And that doesn't take away from the skills of each person. It's just that that there's a greater, in the combining of the two people or the two teams, if it's a larger group, in getting really involved in playing the game, even if they're on opposite sides. I think there's a sense of appreciating what the other side or the other individual has to contribute. Once you're in the game with them for more than like a minute or two, so that you realize there's something, it's like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And then I'm also thinking, because I love words, and especially Hebrew words, it's like they have like multitudes of hints and possibilities. And I'm thinking of how the word shalom, peace, begins with shel. In other words, you have to feel part of something in order to have a chance at coming to peace.
Nice.
So if it's an argument that's not for the sake of heaven, and one person is trying to diss the other, then neither of them feel part of it. And it can't really come to anything good. And then thinking about the word machloket, in that is chelek. So it's almost like hinting that everyone has a part in this. And that maybe if that's the focus, then it'll all come to some kind of resolution.
Right. So the people have to be invested. You have to stake a claim, but not only in something smaller, but in something larger and in the engagement with the other. I also want to circle back. I didn't get a chance just to appreciate the various kind of comments about how much even more inflamed and difficult it is to have disagreements now, and how much more maybe high stakes things feel even than just a few years ago. I think that's certainly feels true. Mom and Dad?
I
And
was
then
just thinking about what Brocha said about sports. I was thinking about football players. That's a violent game, and they're just physically, in many ways, attacking each other. Yet when the game is over, the players look for each other to shake hands or hug or something. And it's funny because I don't see that reaction at the end of a baseball game, which is nowhere near as violent. So it's interesting how that plays out.
Yeah, interesting to see how those different sports. Yeah, Elon, as you know, plays ultimate frisbee, and something they do in ultimate frisbee after the game is they get in a circle, the two teams, almost like staggering players alternating from the two teams, and they give each other, you give positive feedback to a player from the other team about something you liked about how they played. It's
Yeah,
not
that's good.
it's not machloket of any kind, actually, but it's really not just great sportsmanship. But yeah, it's interesting to see how people, yeah,
It's peace.
yes, exactly. It's peace. Debbie?
Just to along the lines of what Bracha had said, that Bracha picked up on shel from shalom, but it's also shalem. It's complete. That you have to have a sense of belonging and a sense of completion, as opposed to in machloket, it's splintered, it's chelek, it's divisive. And litchalek is to divide up, when you divide something up. So the word itself, dictates what it is. Their exact, peace is the exact opposite. Wholesomeness is the exact opposite of what disagreement spawns. While in English, there are many, many different words. In Hebrew has such beauty in it that the shoresh itself indicates what it does. It's much more compact there.
Yes.
And to second what your father had said, one of my sons brought out to me, he was watching a hockey game. At the end of a hockey game, which I think is unbelievably violent, the teams pass each other by and shake hands. He said they don't do that in any other sport. And maybe the football players talk to each other, but it's not formalized. While in hockey, they actually, skate by each other and everybody shakes hands, and that occurs after every hockey game. Perhaps it's reverse proportion to the amount of violence in the game, is
Interesting.
to make peace with it.
Interesting. Interesting. Thank you. Great thoughts. Yeah.
Judith,
Yeah.
how would you explain that?
Yeah,
footnote-
James, I saw you posted that link of the version in which they do
Yeah, the Jerusalem Talmud.
very violent.
But it says in the footnote that Rabbi Fagelson provided, Rabbi Fagelson, that Hillel was given the halacha because he was more modest.
Mm-hmm.
How does that relate to finding the truth? If they're arguing about which halacha is the truth, then how is the truth decided by the character trait of the one
Right.
issuing that opinion?
Yeah, that's why I agree with your implied question, and that's why I kind of feel like the movement towards like how we paskin slash resolution feels to me like it may be moving away from the truth question. I don't even feel that uh, treading carefully here. I don't even feel like the choice of how we practice, like halacha lema'aseh, has to be so tied primarily to truth. Like I could understand saying, okay, Hillel was humble, so they like as a credit to them, we choose to practice according to their ruling, not because it's necessarily more true. There's the Professor Moshe Halbertal has a really excellent. I can't remember if it is in something called People of the Book. I don't remember now. He has an essay about different models of revelation. And some of them are like calls like the retrieval model, right? That bottom line of how we're trying to get in halacha and in all other things is to kind of get back to the singular truth that was revealed at Sinai. And then there are other models which are kind of like constitutive. You go through a rigorous process, and what feels the most truthful from your analysis no one thinks that that's proves that it's what was exactly given at Sinai, but it has its own sort of revelatory power because it's the product of analysis and study and application. Um, and truth is sort of a different axis almost. So I think he's motivated here by the comment of Rav Ovadia Mibartanura that links machloket in search of truth with then the demonstration of which is more true by which way we paskin. I wouldn't go that way necessarily. I think the arguments and the positions are about the pursuit of truth, but where we practically fall out doesn't necessarily mean it's the more true. That's not always an easy thing to sit with. So I feel like the questions that he asked, we didn't necessarily tackle as much, but I do want to leave them for us because, I think that maybe these are just the folks I hang out with, or the situations I find myself in, but I think, or my own personality, I think by and large, because so many situations, it's so hard to argue or debate. I find like I don't engage in that much argument or debate. It's just sort of like, well, we're not going to necessarily be able to talk about this effectively, so let's just leave it. And that's a pity under some set of circumstances. And so, I don't think the takeaway here about shalom is at all avoiding conflict. It is figuring out the circumstances in which and the ways in which and the people with which one can have constructive argument, debate, and a piece that we didn't get a chance to delve into as much, which is the claim that doing that effectively actually brings people closer together. And then this piece of awareness. Yeah, David L. You're muted still.
Taking the other side of what I said previously, Ma'aseh Shahaya.
Yeah.
There's a professor at Tufts named Eitan Hirsch.
Yeah.
And he teaches a class called American Conservatism in the poli-sci department. And it's a class about contemporary issues. And what he says is that in a university campus holding, we're not talking about Israel, Palestine, leave that aside for a minute. There is a general presumption in in most American institutions of higher learning that people share a certain set of worldviews. And we can say that those set of worldviews are left of center. And what he wants to do is to bring with primary sources the conservative view of issues that the students think they know what their positions are. So, for example, with regard to trans rights, Andrew Sullivan, a former editor of the New Republic and a pretty famous outspoken leader of the gay rights movement, has a controversial article about why the gay community should oppose trans rights. And he teaches that text. In talking about his seminar a couple of weeks ago, Deborah Lipstadt, Leon Wieseltier, and Bill Ackman noted that seminar. And Leon, the great provocateur of our time, one of the great provocateurs of our time, said, wouldn't it be interesting if you randomly assigned points of view to the students and said that they had to make the argument reflecting that point of view? So the generosity of spirit that I think that the text that you brought is talking about, first of all, slowing ourselves down to reflect as opposed to respond, and then being generous of spirit towards the other is, I think, really inspiring and worthy goal within the 20-yard lines. And that there are other issues, and we have to figure out which those are and how we know what they are, where we actually should have strongly held views and responses, which isn't to say we should shout and scream and act impolitely, but there are places where we are less amenable to change or even being generous of spirit towards the other.
We should come to an appellate argument.
I'd love to. Send an invite.
All right, September.
Okay.
Great. Great. All right, wonderful, wonderful learning together again. Different vibe, different flavor for this book, and especially appreciate everyone's engagement and comments. Really, really deepens the learning. And of course, I'll take my moment to check the schedule for next week as best as I know it. Should be a regular Monday night slot as we March 4th. Night to all, love to mom and dad. Great to welcome Mark Baker to the crowd. Hope to see you again soon, and hope the Lappins are well up in camp.
Chodesh Tov to everybody.
Kodesh Tov. Night all. Bye.
Kodesh Tov.